When I was smuggling narcotics and guns across the Afghan border in 1999, I was offered my own town, a small city really, a fortress where I could do as I wished, immune from the laws of the world. During that time, while I was searching for a friend who'd been kidnapped, I learnt, and the hard way, that really there was no such thing as the Taliban, even though they supposedly ruled at the time. There was no such thing as the Taliban then, and there's no such thing now. And who offered this perfect protection? A tribal lord, an army major from Pakistan, somebody whose occupation, well, could have been anything, a local man who taxed electricity with a gun, my friends. And who are they really? Officials? Big shots? No, same as I was. Criminals. Hello, David McMillan here with something special this week. A transition in Afghanistan. A criminal corporate takeover from one mob to another. A true crime of the 21st century. A $1 trillion scam over 20 years. Billions in aid money. New government infrastructure and military budgets. For what? And who is this Taliban and why do they act as one? Well, why does the Kansas City mob cooperate with the New Jersey boys? Because it's profitable. For the moment. To understand this mess, first forget about the word Taliban. It means student and was a scatty little group of fundamentalists used by one of the warlord groups to pressure another, a fringe outfit. Back in '96, it was easy to get recruits. The frustrated boys who couldn't get a girl had memories of the high school and university girls in smart Western clothes who would embarrass them during the days of the government the Russians had set up. It might not have been a free society, but the Soviet puppet state was a modern one. Those village boys would turn red at these modern women and vow revenge for their sexual frustration. Oh, when my beard only grows. Their time would come, and it did. They were joined by every cutthroat villain from tribes across the land. The country was such a mess from civil wars over the years that the Taliban's hardline vows of honest rule seemed appealing. Until they got control and closed everything worth doing. No music, no dancing. City women forced to wear the full Ninja Turtle outfits of the hill tribes where all women were owned. The country was recognized by only 3 or 4 others, and notably Pakistan across the border. Pakistan had learned that lesson from old-school British diplomacy. If your neighbour is a wreck, then he can't hurt you. There were holdout regions. The Northern Alliance under Ahmad Massoud, given Stinger missiles to shoot down Russian helicopters by the CIA. I was offered one for $180,000. Couldn't think of a target. Massoud, a great man until he was blown to bits by a fake video camera. And they'd set up an interview and, well, you know the rest. Ahmad's son is in the game today, though. Still in the Panjshir Valley. Quite safe. There were other warlord heroes on our side, too. Like General Marshal... I can't keep up with his titles. Dostum is his name. A drunken a lecher, I'm told, but more bark than bite nowadays. He didn't make much of an effort to hold the north last week. The Afghan economy was a complete mess back in the first Taliban takeover. No jobs, so young men from across the country worked for food and scraps. Yet there were all about their clan, their tribe, not Taliban, not especially religious, just guys with no jobs with a gun for hire. The opium farmers and traders were taxed, but there was a heroin bottleneck. And the Pakistan smugglers and dealers had used the 1990s Taliban takeover to push up prices, claiming crackdowns had made the product scarce. Yet the Taliban had tons in stockpile, couldn't move it. It was going north through Iran and Russia, and of course quality dropped. Careless marketing and greed always ruined that trade. I was in Jalalabad looking for the kidnapped young teacher. I found an old friend, a young guy running trade through that border city. I asked him about the Taliban. That's just the word you foreigners use, he told me. There's lots of names here, but they're all different people. But some of them, he stressed, some of them take it all seriously, so you can't joke around, David, like you did in the old days. I guess most of you know that everybody since Alexander the Great's been fighting in Afghanistan. The British have had 3 major wars there up until 1916. Then, of course, the Russians came in. That didn't serve them well after a decade, and the Mujahideen, amongst others, chased them out. So why go back in again? And to really consider the group of people there to be united in any way. They say this, but I get more by looking at my 1947 map of ethnographic map of Afghanistan. When I look at it, it has the Pashtun, Hazara, Uzbek, Baluch, Nuristani. They've got a special look to them. The Goshur and Populazi tribe, clan really. And that's Kazai's people, by the way. It is not. Some of the languages in the Pesai group, they can't be understood by one another. Can you imagine with, 25 different languages across the country that they're going to be united? Would you feel that way? And that sort of kinship which would hold you together as an organization, as a group, when you were from a village, from a tribe, didn't speak the language, and traditionally hated the people across the hill? No. Let's not call them Taliban. Let's keep to Talibat. There's always a but. Yes, let's call them Talibat, so we know who they are not. So, the country back then was a dark failure. The things that did run were run by the leftovers from the old regime. When I needed help, I found Mansour, who was an engineer in the tiny Afghan Air Force, and had, like anyone who could do anything really useful, been kept on. He helped me get the kidnapped kid back for a fair price. I've written about those days, so I won't go on about all that here. Taliban rule was a mess, but from an economic point of view, they got lucky. Though they didn't think so at the time, and probably don't do so today, for there's the next generation of Taliban that benefited. Back then, they had allowed a boring but loudmouth former London disco duck, well, he was for a night, and Saudi Arab exile to settle in the east. The tall guy was wanted and was making a nuisance of himself because of it was a fallout with his wealthy family, property developers in Saudi Arabia. Extraordinarily, in a great piece of theatrical horror, one of his stunts actually worked. 9/11. We were all outraged. New York City. Everyone loved New York. I do. And another thing, the guy who took the credit had a look to him that was somehow familiar to an older generation. He had an uncanny resemblance to Raymond Massey playing Bible-thumping nutter John Brown, the American Civil War era activist. You know what happened next. The US steamed in along with NATO. The Department of Defense were happy. They like to get the equipment tested in the field every decade or so, as they did with Gulf War One. But Afghanistan, it's one thing shooing away the Taliban, but what are you going to do with a lawless country with no government once you have it? One thing for sure, it'll cost you plenty. I'd been doing business in Afghanistan, smuggling drugs, a few weapons, and at one time ancient coins from the lost kingdoms of Alexander the Great. Yes, I'm scum, but I was there, so learned a few things. Mainly that the Taliban is not a coherent organised group, but many unemployed young men given guns and an opportunity. The members of that club are loyal to family, then tribe, then local area and language zone. I know I've said this before, but it's just not a thing, Taliban. But the people you see on TV giving interviews are the ones simply capable of speaking on TV. That's how come they get that little assignment. They are not likely to have any power on the ground. They will be exiles or wanted or just a front. It's more like 800 loosely cooperating criminal gangs there. But there are other players stringing along, and there's always a but. So we'll call them the Taliban, so we know who we mean. While in power in the 1990s, they taxed and skimmed and extorted ruthlessly. Only one group was worse. The government, the USA, and NATO allies, that's us, put in power after pushing the Taliban beyond Nutbush city limits. Yes, we installed a government from 2001 with, well, anyone who had taken a shave, spoke passable English, and had some claim to Afghani nobility. Every Afghan that had money enough to get out of town way back was now welcome and could select their staff, as long as a few women were given a job too. No power, of course, and elections. 50% illiterate and hadn't left the village, but you've got to have elections. We do. What difference does it make? Nothing. The official Afghan government of the last 2 decades was totally corrupt. They milked the aid, they sidelined infrastructure, cash. Sure, things were open to all, providing you were Pashtun, spoke Pashto without an accent, or Classy Dari, which is a Persian variant. But the regular people couldn't get anything done without a backhander or bribe on several levels. Even the 300,000-strong Afghan army your taxes paid for was fake. Firstly, over 35% of recruits couldn't read. Secondly, they were still very tribal and didn't like the job that paid badly so far from home. The worst thing was that you were likely to be killed by the equipment sold to the very Taliban, and the very worst, you'd still get your salary when you were dead, except that Colonel Khalasat would put it in his pocket. Around 60,000 soldiers were ghosts. The Taliban watched from the hills with envy. Why couldn't they get a share of city life? They still had extortion in the countryside, a cut on mining and opium. By the way, there were supposed to be strikes from the west on the laboratories and from the east, but really there aren't any laboratories as you would imagine them. There I've seen a tribal in Helmand province use a laundry bucket, red plastic it was, and a couple of sheets to make up a batch. They'll make it white if you ask nicely. Yet the country, the cities, they were doing quite well in the 2000s. Gated communities being built, or sold off plan at any rate. There's a picture of a noble from the Hotak dynasty showing an interest in Caravan City. The new Talibans will like those digs when they get to them. But it was time for a huge blunder last year, and if the pandemic wasn't enough, here it came. The US decided to stop paying. Well, pay maintenance cash, but not keep the troops around, even though most were, well, safe-ish. The thing is, the US and NATO were told that the country would never pull itself free of internal violence. So what was there to do? Stay forever? Yes, we should have. The troop death toll was quite low. And what's an army for if not to be on the front line? An empty threat? If we had stayed another 20 years, the next generation might be less corrupt, I suppose. But a deal was struck in Doha with old buggers whose word means little. We don't get in your way, said the US, if you don't let Afghanistan be used as a base for attacking America. Yes, utter nonsense, but maybe it should be good for a few years. It's politics. In democracies, politicians can't play the long game because we will bounce them if they don't do anything. Now, there's lots of countries where elected leaders do absolutely nothing, and everything is just fine. Look at Scandinavia. But when it comes to war games, we want to see the end game. Although no one suggested that about North Korea's half-century war, have they? I checked with some crooked former associates, well, the sons of the people I knew, mostly, who were deceased. One of the sons he would have been just 14 during Taliban 1. He grew up with quite a bit more education than his dad, and he's very excited about his new job this week, whatever it might be. Will Taliban 2, that generation, go back to be as hard-nosed about singing, entertainment, dress code? I asked him. What do you mean? He said. Depends on the boss. I'm cool, he said. I'm hip. Well, words to that effect. Who's your boss, then? I asked. I'm the boss, he told me. Or I will be. A real chip off the old block, that kid. A few things. There's still plenty of idiots around, even if they don't look it from some coordination, such as having a detailed list of who the official Taliban hunters of the last supposed government drawn up and going to their known homes to make threats. Sounds like Taliban 2 has a high-level intelligence bureau. No, the list came from across the eastern border of Pakistan, calling in some markers. Besides, I hear that some tally was wandering around the central bank a couple of days ago to look for where the money at. No, there won't be transport planes packed with US dollars landing every month. And what about the now useless mouths of the former Afghan army? Who will feed them, or the millions now unemployed as contractors have left? New Chinese friends? I don't think so. What of the deposed now? Ashraf Ghani, deposed president, academic anthropologist, schooled throughout Beirut, Columbia, and Johns Hopkins universities. Yes, he was a spy for the Americans. Those historians there an easy catch, don't you think? Were easily recruited. He's in Dubai. No work for him. Not big work, anyway. Perhaps he'll meet Russia's spy in the Afghan government, Sheikh Kagar, again. That was an inclusive part of the government, at least. I see one of my favourite players, Amnullah Saleh, former vice president, has taken the hospitality of Masood's son Ahmed in the Panjshir Valley. Saleh's called himself, well, president in exile or something like that. He'll have a plan. Look, I see you're drifting away as I point to individuals and kind of giving names and asking are these Taliban 2 or ex-Western educated high-caste Afghans. It's very easy to lose track. Never mind. Well, I told you there are no sides other than their own. Don't get drawn into the names, the fronts. The buglers like, what's his name, Stanagzai, chosen only because he could tell a joke to both sides. He was a negotiator. He's coming back, I presume. I only got what I wanted back in the old days because I treated them all like fellow crooks. The younger Taliban's still hoping for some plane loads of cash to fall down from the sky, say they can handle the new ways, the new world. But when there's not enough money to steal to keep everyone happy, as you now know, in Afghanistan, there is always a but. While I'm here, I can clear up something. Quite a few viewers have been wondering whether they have to join up to Amazon's Audible as a subscription, or they can just listen to Unforgiving Destiny as it is. Of course you can do a one-off purchase. There's a little, slightly obscured button underneath the Pay Now bit. It's all there. They'd rather have you for life, though, wouldn't they? We know that. And they've got us.